Hey, what's up everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Fabrication series with yours truly. So recently we just shot Tools of the Trade, which is a 2.5-hour live stream from right here in Las Vegas in the Fabrication series studios and shop. So in case you were unable to tune in, here is a condensed version of Tools of the Trade. What is up everyone? Welcome. Thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate you tuning in, and of course it's America's birthday tomorrow, so it's a little special edition here. Thank you very much for always being a part of the Fabrication series, and I really appreciate you again for tuning in right now. So we're going to go over Tools of the Trade live right now here in Las Vegas in the Fabrication set and studio for season 2. So Ryan, the camera guy, he'll be the one piloting everything, making sure that you guys get to see the good that I have to show. And behind the panel on the chat window and everybody else is Joe, the Marine, actively serving, taking his American weekend off and helping out. So a big shout out to both of these guys, Ryan and Joe. Thank you both very much for volunteering your time and getting this episode for everybody else. So without much further delay, let's get into Tools of the Trade live from Las Vegas. Let's do it. Woo! Here we go. Here we go. Let's start with taking a little jump around the shop real quick here. This is the official set of the Fabrication series for season 2. We started out in my garage, which was essentially one of the biggest things I wanted to do with that was reassure everybody who ended up tuning and jumping in here that it's going to be, that's something that you can do. You can actually build and do all kinds of crazy stuff when it comes to fabrication. You can do it in a 2-car garage, single car garage, anything. You can do it anywhere you want. So, but then it kind of graduated, things got bigger, and I came out of retirement again to, jump into another shop. So I searched around, I had a really great offer, and my buddy James Anderson, owner of Anderson Motorsports, the guy who has been in the majority of all of these cars and everything that I've been building over the years, he's been on the other side of it. So half of his shop and half of my shop here, that's what we got here. So quick little tour around. My inspiration piece obviously on the back wall there. And the guys of you who have been following for a while now, you remember my truck that I got into the accident. I ended up hanging all of these relics and pieces on the wall and whatnot. And this general area right here is pretty much where most of my fabrication is done. So all of the major work and whatnot. And of course we get over, we got the lift, we got pretty much everything you need in a basic shop-like setup. Of course, part of season 2, I'm doing live streams, I'm doing classes, I do one-on-one fabrication for people too, fabrication lessons, instructions, and everything else. So that's where I usually have the TV set up. You see that in the new intros and whatnot, where you see it all. Standard tools, equipment, press, everything else like that. You guys who follow me on social media, you realize or you learned that I just recently started investing into more tools and whatnot. So that's when we got into the machine shop, where I just recently bought out what was left of a machine shop in a town not too far away from here. So we picked up a vertical mill, horizontal bandsaw, and a disc belt sander, which we'll be getting into a lot of those later on down the road. So let's get started with some very basic tools. So let's get right down into the basics, okay? There are some very simple hand tools that you have inside of your world when you need to start measuring different pieces and parts to actually create whatever it is that you're creating. Now, of course, the number one thing that you find yourself using the most, obviously, is a tape measure. Now, personally, I'm actually really picky about my tape measures. I like the ones that automatically lock, so that way I can get it onto a piece, I can sit there, I can measure, I can do whatever I need to do, and retract accordingly. Because most of the time, you'll sit there, you'll try to, say, measure a piece of, say metal or whatever you have to work on, and if it's not locked in place, it's kind of difficult to sit there and work it around. So with an automatic locking, I can sit here, take my measurements, write down what I need to write down, make some notes, whatever the case. So I typically like to use the locking style. Now it's really up to you and whatever style you have, and also the scale of whatever's on there. So you have, in this one I have quick reference marks for fractions of the linear measurement or the inch or whatever the case is that I'm measuring. It's a nice little handy guide there so you don't actually have to count your ticks. Now, of course, these are, for you guys overseas that like to do things a little bit differently, like using the metric system. I do have a couple of different tape measures, metric and standard and all the rest of that good stuff. So tape measure being your very, very basic one, this essentially becomes your best friend because I don't know, without it, you're just eyeballing everything and you'll never ever actually getting to what you need to get to in order to get it all set up and measured. So make sure when you choose a tape measure, you get one that you're very, very comfortable with using, right? You don't need something like 100 feet long and you don't need like a little 12-footer or anything like that. But find a good tape measure, one that can take a lot of abuse. You can drop it, you can knock it around, throw it, and of course it's gonna get burned, charred, screwed up, or whatever the case is, because this industry of working with metal, everything gets messed up. So after you have everything measured, you'll want to use something like, say like a square. So if you can draw your lines, check them out, measure them out, square everything off, make some references. A good square is something that you can have. This being pretty much a standard style, or you can use the carpenter style, which looks actually like a triangle. There's a couple of different ones around that you can use in order to actually square off and make a straight line. And this one actually has a ruler on it, which if you were to take this out of here, that would double as an actual ruler. So you don't necessarily have to have the two, but it's a really good idea to have some sort of straight device, or a device that you can use to use a straight line. Another style is this old rusty square that I've had for about 11 gigabillion years. And you can use them to set up different angles, you know, different positions and whatnot. If you needed to do, say, like a straight line between two reference points, like the ones we created here earlier, you can use that one. We're going to use the one where you have a nice straight edge. That'll help you get your lines and everything in place. Now, it's a good idea to get you know, a pretty decent brand, not necessarily one that totally sucks or one that's you know, cheap. Okay, you want to kind of invest into your future with your tools. You want to create or purchase something that's going to last quite some time. Now, some of this stuff you can go cheap on. You know, like this. This is one of the different protractors that I use. You've seen me use these on quite a few different episodes over the years. We can set these up to whatever dial or degree you want to go at. So let's say you wanted to set it up to like 70 degrees to cut your line at this point here. You can use it to scribe a line, you can use it to find an angle, you can use it to do just about anything you really want to do. And this particular style offers a different adjustment, and it makes it a lot easier to get into different places, nooks, crannies, and you know, what have you. So having a nice protractor is a good thing to find, or is a good thing to have, as well as an angle finder. And this is also sometimes considered a protractor. So as you tilt or you move it, it will tell you what angle something is sitting at. So let's say particularly like a roll cage, for example, if you need to calculate or figure out which angle, let's say like a door bar would be sitting at inside of a roll cage, you'll want to use your angle finder or your protractor to actually do that. Now we also use it on different things like, you know, inside of the sheet metal brake back there, we got to figure out what angle we're bending at because it doesn't have a gauge on it. We'll stick the angle finder on that. You'll see me use that a lot more, especially this bending brake here, in future episodes coming up as part of season 2. So the very last thing as far as the simple tools are concerned, a marker. You really can't get away with doing anything without a good marker. Now, your choice of marker really is up to you on which one you want to use. Now, in this case, unfortunately, I didn't get out before the episode to get my favorite marker, so I'm stuck here with a bunch of Sharpies. It's not like they're bad, but there is one that comes out a lot further than that one, and that's the Milwaukee ink salt marker. This marker is virtually indestructible. Now, I think I've had this one for the better part of about 5 or 6 months now, and while it still does write, and it still does a pretty decent job, it's a little worn out by now. But at the same time, these things almost last forever, and they're worth every single penny that I've ever spent on markers. Now, I can burn through about 6 of these to 1 of these. So that's just a little nice little extra thing to have there. So, but you can never have too many markers. Another instrument of measuring I forgot to bring up here is a caliper. You also use calipers, micrometers, all kinds of other good stuff. But if you want to do a thickness check on whatever you're using here, let's say like this piece of aluminum, know what size or what thickness the metal is on there, you simply take it, squeeze it, find out what you have there. You can also use it to do inside dimensions. If I needed to know the distance between my fingers, it would do that. And you can also use it for depth dimensions. So the distance between the top of the protractor here and down to the table there, we have whatever our measurement comes out reading. Now, if you're in the machine world, you'll have much more expensive pieces than this. In fact, I do too. But this one being a $30 caliper, it's one that I don't mind getting abused and having messed up or whatever the case is. So that's you know, one of those nice things that you can have. So once you've used your measuring instruments or your tools to create whatever project it is that you're creating, you're eventually going to need to cut them. That's what we're going to get into next. So let's work into some cutting here. You've seen me use a lot of tools over the years. Now there are tons and tons and tons of tools you can use for cutting virtually anything. There's everything from very expensive machines. You can go into CNC machining. You can go into very basic hand tools. You know, you got some hacksaws. You got some, band saws, all the rest of that stuff. We're gonna get into those in a few minutes here, but let's talk about some hand tools, some very basic things. And many of these things you saw me use in season 1 while I was in the garage. And that was actually one of those things where a lot of people asked, how do you do so much with so little? Well, most of it's just learning how to use it and how to actually apply what you have to, let's say, cut something or do something very, very basic. So there's some very basic cutting seals. One of my favorite ones, and I bet you a bunch of you guys that have been listening or watching for a long time can tell me exactly what I say when I grab my tin snips. Let's see if anybody gets it real quick. Maybe drop it in the box there. There's one common phrase I use when it comes to grabbing my tin snips. Haven't got it now? Get strong. Why do I always say get strong? Because when you take something like this, a very, very simple and basic tool, and you start carving and cutting your way into whatever metal or material you're going into, you're gonna find out you're gonna get what we call a Popeye arm when you get about, I don't know, a good foot into it. But tin snips, they're very, very simple. We have red ones, we have yellow ones, and we have green ones. Now I'm only using my reds because that's the most common ones I use. Red tin snips are designed to sit inside of your right hand and they cut left. Yellow tin snips, they are designed to sit in either hand and cut either direction. But unfortunately, they're a little bit limited because a lot of things will get caught in the throat without bending and distorting the metal itself. Green tin snips, they're designed to sit in your left hand and cut right, but you can actually stick either or in either hand. It's just the way that they're designed to do. How do they work? Take whatever it is that you have to cut, hold it perpendicular to the metal that you're cutting in, and just start squeezing. Now you can cut straight with them, you can change direction. You can do just about anything that you want to do as far as tin snips are concerned. I don't primarily use them for cutting out big, long pieces of material. So like this area that we marked out right here, I would find a different material to actually cut these lines out because doing it with the snips, one, this piece would get pretty distorted and ugly looking, just the same as this one kind of did. You can see the result of it, right? And two, that's gonna kill my arm. It's gonna be a lot to do. And in the motorcycle chopper seat pan that I just released a few weeks ago, when it went up on YouTube, I did the entire pan with my bare hands with the snips, and I just about died, even though even when it was on video, I mean, I had to shorten the time down or whatever it was edited, but oh man, I can tell you, as I was sitting there just carving along there, I was just like, please just let me get to this last cut because it was something fierce, it was serious. But what I primarily use these for is cutting corners. So if you have like a ridiculously sharp edge or something that you don't want to get yourself stuck with or send it through your hand or tear you wide open or whatever the case is, snips are a good way to cut corners. You can also use snips for smaller pieces of metal. So if you just need to get yourself some at whatever dimension, slice that off, slice this off. You can cut out a little box. You can do just about anything small with a set of snips. Now this is a tool you definitely want to have inside of your toolbox, absolutely, because it's one of the very basic, simple tools that's going to get you pretty far, and you realize how much you actually use them over and over and over again. Now, my favorite brand on this one, this is obviously free plug for Wiss, but I have taken Wiss snips for a lot of years now, and I have put them through absolute abuse. I've cut everything up to 1/8 inch thick aluminum with a set of basic hand tin snips. Now, a good brand will get you very, very far, especially these ones. So definitely one of my favorite ones. I like to use the offsets because as you're cutting, the metal coming back this way, well, you can actually get around it without hitting your hand on it, you know, and messing up your metal as you're going around with it. So another very common method of cutting is a reciprocating saw. Now, of course, I'm a big fan of DeWalt tools, and I love using them, and I've spent an ungodly amount of money making sure that my shop is equipped with them. And the reason why, they don't break. So I take care of them really well, and they've taken care of me over the years. But you can take something like a reciprocating saw. If you don't have anything like a bandsaw or plasma cutter or anything like that, you can use a reciprocating saw to cut through just about anything. It depends on the blade that you use. So let's say, for example, I want to slice out this piece. makes it through, but it definitely tears up the metal. Of course, using a blade that's about 6 inches long is not helping my situation in getting that cut either, so. But usually you use these for, let's say you have a whole bulk of tube and you want to just get it cut down to size and you don't want to feed it into a saw or anything like that. You can use your reciprocating saw, get it all set up, chop it all up so you can stick it on a rack, let's say like the one you have in the back there. That's one method you can use. You can use it if you're slicing out tubes inside of a car. You can use it for, you know, cutting up pieces of metal. You can use a reciprocating saw for just about anything, as long as you have the right blade in there that's dedicated to it. So it's definitely a good tool to have around. Now, of course, I have a cordless version of it. They do make them in corded. Just about every brand has one. But if you intend to use something like a reciprocating saw a lot, get a good one. Definitely buy yourself a good brand. So another method of cutting here. You don't usually see this done on aluminum very often. Is using your grinder. This being outfitted with a cutoff wheel, it doesn't do exceptional on aluminum, but there are aluminum cutoff wheels, or specifically designed for aluminum. But at the end of the day, just about everything's going to make it through and everything's going to cut on it. So as you set it up here, you can make small cuts. And you can see definitely on a piece of aluminum how much slag and junk that leaves behind. But regardless, if you're in a pinch and you only have the bare minimum amount of tools, definitely have a grinder. Now this is another one. I cannot ever stress this enough. Have a good grinder. Buy a good grinder. Invest in a good grinder. There are many top brands out there, but there are ones that are absolutely terrible. And those ones that are absolutely terrible will definitely screw you up in the future. I mean, how many of them do you want to buy before you bought the right one the first time? So with all of that, we have different types of materials, consumables, things that we can attach to the edge of the grinder. We'll say, for example, on this piece where we just cut it all out and leaves all this nasty slag from both the reciprocating saw and the cutoff wheel itself, there's some nasty stuff on there that we want to get cleaned off. The grinder is definitely going to be able to cut its way through that. We have varying degrees of grinding capabilities. These three being the ones that I use the most. The rough actual grinding stone, very abrasive. It'll take off just about everything. It'll knock it all out. Grinds away very, very quickly, but leaves a very, very rough finish, much like the reciprocating saw, except it's going to tear it up even further. Next is the flap wheel. I use this routinely, and I almost always have a flap wheel outfitted in my grinder. 90% of the time, that's what I have. It consists of nothing more than a big stack of basically sandpaper, all adhered and glued to the back of the disc itself where it actually outfits to the grinder. Now these are available in varying grades. In this case, I believe this one is this is a 60 grit. You can buy them 80. I've seen all the way up to like 120, 150 grit. So one of these, or actually getting a decent flap wheel, is a very, very good thing to get into. Now they do make them in different thicknesses. This one being a fat one, or I like the fatter ones because as I'm doing, let's say, tube work, and if you've watched the tube notching video where I do everything by hand, I like when it starts getting worn down and creates a nice little profile, a nice round radius where I can get in and start carving my way through a lot of materials. Another very similar product is the fine finish surface flap disc. Now this is a surface prep pad, much like a Scotch-Brite. And when these are all laid out and adhered to the disc itself, it creates a very, very fine finish, and it only takes off small amounts of material. So it means you can get in there, remove scratches, remove nasty marks, and all kinds of other stuff. So these are very, very expensive. They usually run $17 to $20 a piece, and they don't really last very long. But at the same time, a good one of these for some good metal finishing or some very fine finish work and reveal is a good investment to have. So I usually save these and keep them all the way down to where they're past the point where they start wearing down here. I'll actually tear this down and see if I can get some more use out of them because they're pretty expensive. So these only being a couple dollars a piece. And of course, one of these is like $2 for the big surface grinding one. So you probably want to see how all of these work. I'll show you. We'll check out the varying finishes of them. So again, not typically used on aluminum is one of these big styles here, but this one leaves a ridiculously nasty finish on it. very deep, heavy gouging. That'll be the finish on your actual finished piece. So if you're just trying to shape something after cutting it or getting some slag off, using, let's say, like an oxyacetylene torch, then it'll definitely, that'll make light work out of it. Next up will be the flap disc. It's a little bit smoother. You see how it comes out with an overlap? It's not as deep, it's a little bit more uniform. It's a lot nicer of a finish. Go for the fine finish. Notice how that pretty much just kind of scuffs up the top of it and cleans it all out. And if you work at it long enough, you'll get it through this section inside of here. So after making a cut, such as the one that we did with the reciprocating saw and with the cutoff wheel, you'll want to clean your edges up. I almost always use a flap disc to do that, unless I use something that came from like a acetylene torch or something like that that puts a lot of slag down on it. Almost always, 90% of the time, I'm using a flap disc. Pretty clean. Now on top of that, you can use your flap disc to do some general shaping. Let's say that we wanted to create a nice little radius going around the edge of this. Couldn't be simpler. So your grinder is an excellent tool to invest in, and of course your consumables. Make sure that you have plenty of everything that you're going to use. Everything from cutoff wheels, hard grinding discs, sanding discs like the flap wheel, and even the finer grit ones. Those will get the majority of your cut and shape work done. And you can actually get by for a long time just using those simple tools. You can get through everything that way. Now, another thing that you do if you want to step it up just a little bit and you want to do a lot more production style cutting, you'll end up grabbing yourself a chop saw. And once again, I am a sucker for DeWalt tools because they just last forever and they are really, really awesome. I've outfitted my chop saw to a collapsing miter stand. And this particularly makes extremely light work of everything that I have to do. So it can be portable, it can be changed, it can be run around wherever you gotta go, sets up in seconds. And yes, I think this is probably the greatest $200 I've ever spent in my life. I also have one outfitted to my miter saw. Using the chop saw, we use an abrasive wheel, spins around, contacts your metal, starts slicing its way through it. Now the thing about this one, a lot of people will ask me about blade deflection. So if we're doing things like cutting notches and whatnot, there is one very, very common rule I tell everybody. Let the blade do the work. Your job of the blade is to cut through the material. Your muscles are not meant to cut through the material. They're just supposed to, collapse the saw as it advances itself. So, pretty big deal. Very easy to use. Very quickly, but it leaves kind of a mess behind. And that's where you go up with your grinder or whatever the case is, or whatever you're using, and you can actually clean this up and make it nice and pretty. One last thing for cutting, we can't exclude actually putting holes into things. Now, putting holes into something requires a drill. Again, you can go corded, you can go cordless, you can use either or. It doesn't really matter. But, using something like a piece of aluminum here and a simple drill bit, pop your hole into whatever it is that you need to put your hole in. It's very, very simple. You should definitely have yourself a good set of drill bits, not cheap, not worn out, not messed up, not junk. You want to invest into a good set of drills, drill bits on there. And aside from that one, you need to cut a hole larger than, let's say, a 1/4 inch here. You're going to need something a little bit stronger, a little bit bigger, in which case we're going to use the hole saw. The hole saw will essentially make the right size hole for whatever it is that you need to put a hole into. So in this case, we're using it for 1 3/4 inches. There's our hole. Now again, when you do something like this, or you use like a hole saw and just about any other cutting material, you'll see some slag and a bunch of junk being left behind. And that's where you can also go in there. You can take your grinder, you can take a file, you can take whatever you have, a very basic tool. Provide just a little bit of mild cleanup, you have a perfectly cut hole. Now, hole saws are another one of those things that you want to invest in a decent set. So if you get a really crappy set, you'll probably realize going through a piece of soft aluminum like this, you'll get about 3 or 4 holes cut out of it before it goes dull. So you want to get a good set. Same thing goes with your drill. Invest in a good drill, especially if it's a tool that you're going to be using for a long time. Now, you have cutting out of the way. Let's get into what's next. Shaping. So we have our piece cut to design, the whatever we're going to make. What if you need to change the shape of it? There's different ways to change the shape of it. We can bend it, we can contour it, we can round it, we can beat the absolute hell out of it, and we do whatever it is that we want to do with it. Whatever the piece that you're creating, you're eventually going to need to change the shape of it. Maybe you got just a little bit too ambitious on your cut and you found out at the end of the day that you bent the crap out of it. Well, how are you going to straighten it? Well, you can go back and try to form it back, get it close, whatever, but you'll see a crease in there, and we use different types of materials and tools to get those creases out and change the shape. In this case, hammers. We have lots of hammers. I personally have tons of hammers. I've invested into so many of them over the years. The best ones that I've ever found are the old ones, the ones that you find at stuff like swap meets, yard sales, and closeouts and stuff like that. Not necessarily cheapo ones, even though I do own a few, I'm not gonna lie. The ones I don't use the most are the ones that I buy kind of inexpensive. So, go over a couple of basic hammers here. We've all seen the style of framing hammer, smashes a nail into the side of a house or whatever the case is, has that claw on the back side of it. That's kind of, that takes care of a lot of people's needs. But there's also sheet metal hammers, specific styles that do certain things, create different finishes on it. And then we have our best friend here. This is something that everybody needs inside of their toolbox. And it's basically a very, very heavy hammer, small sledgehammer. It's most commonly known by 3 very, very simple letters, BFH. Now I run a clean channel here and I'm not going to say what BFH means, but I'm pretty sure somebody in the comments there will definitely fill in the blanks if you don't know what BFH is. We're not going to say it, but it's definitely something good to have here, because with very light work, you can take something like your BFH and it makes a pretty big impression, a big change in everything with very, very little effort. So let's say you're doing something like when you saw me doing, let's say the rocker boxes on the Evo roll cage that I did in season 1, I definitely brought out the BFH when I was trying to shift and shape those rocker boxes and create those breaks and bends BFH for. Another one for simple shaping, sheet metal hammers. Now, these come in all kinds of different shapes, sizes, different functions, face finishes, whatnot. Now my cheapo ones here, I beat the everlasting crap out of them. My expensive nice ones, I keep a nice clean finish on them. I usually routinely sand them out and I don't put them through a lot of abuse. So in this case, on this episode here, as I'm showing you here, I'm just using scrap metals and all kinds of other stuff. Another good one to have is a wood hammer. The wood hammer will do a lot of your shaping. The beauty of it is, depending on how you use it, it doesn't necessarily leave an impression behind, but it will actually provide a good impact or force to change the shape of something. Now, using something like you just recently saw me use on the chopper seat pan that I did, you notice that I used this hammer and a piece of sheet metal with that dolly inside my vise, and I actually created a radiused edge. And that's where we get into using things like the dollies. You can set it up on the edge of a dolly. A little bit of work, practice, precision, and skill, you can actually get that nice clean radiused edge, even going around corners. Now, a lot of that takes a lot of work, and it takes years of practice to actually master that, but remember, practice makes perfect. Now, another thing that's really great about using hammers like this is, let's say that we don't want that radiused edge on the end of it. You can find yourself a nice flat surface. Get a different style, a correct style hammer. You can use it to smash it back out.
From Superior Welding, what about brass hammers?
Brass hammers, I actually don't have any of them. They're great for doing things like if you're beating the smash out of something and don't want to leave a lot of impressions behind, a brass hammer is a great tool to have. I don't find myself doing that very often, so it's one of those that I actually don't own. But yes, it's a great thing to have if you're going to be smashing and bashing on things without trying to mark them up and mar them up. So they won't mar and scratch a lot of finishes. Softer metals than that, they will. But the most common thing I remember seeing them in actually is lowriders. Way back in the day when you're putting on those little 13-inch Daytons on there with like a billion spokes on it, and there's only that one center lug, you're taking a brass hammer and you're smashing the hell out of it trying to get it to either loosen up or tighten down. So that's another one of those things. Another useful hammer to have around is a soft hammer. Now this is above and beyond a rubber mallet, but the soft hammer has a non-marking hard plastic side, which will, well, you can see I use mine all the time. Many of these, they offer a replaceable side, so you can actually unscrew that and screw it back on there. And then you have a soft rubber side of it. So what you can do with a lot of these things is you can shape shift, you can change all kinds of different things. You can you can probably like beat on a pin or something like that that's very, very soft, and you don't want to scar and mar the finish of it, or you don't want to leave a hard impression behind. A good dual purpose hard plastic rubber hammer, or what we just call a soft hammer, is a very, very good tool to have. So even just these basics right here, you can get a lot of work done, a whole lot of different things done around the shop without spending, let's say, $10,000 on a really awesome power hammer, or any one of those things, or English wheels, even though they are great tools to have if you're going into metal shaping.
Finally, for Nadine, when do you hammer against or using a vise versus using a sandbag?
When you want to actually shape something, that gets into stuff like when you're shaping, let's say like shaping a bowl into something, or even sometimes doing seat pans or whatever the case is. That soft sandbag will actually start creating contours in different forms, and you use different hammers to do that. But that right there will get your general shape without putting a massive impression into it. So let's say like if I use the BFH here again to try to smash out some form here. Some very basic stuff. Doing that into a sandbag will leave those impressions out of it. And of course, using the correct hammer will do that too, but the sandbag will actually create contours and forms into the actual piece that you're working with. And that was a very excellent question. So moving on. So, more about changing the shape of something. And this is probably everybody's favorite subject when it comes to it, is tube bending. Tube bending is the greatest thing in the world to a lot of people because you can make all kinds of really awesome stuff out of it. You can make ash bars, roll cages, tube chassis, subframes, bumpers, running boards. You can make just about anything if you just had a way to bend a tube, right? There's all kinds of different stuff out there that you can use. This tube bender in particular is meant for tube, not pipe. I don't bend pipe, I only bend tube. But this tube bender in particular, when you watch Tube Bending Basics, you saw me break down the complete nomenclature of everything. This is my GD Squared Model 3. Why do I use the Model 3 and why do I use a manual bender? That is probably the number one question, why I use the bare minimum and do it all by hand. Primary reason behind that, doing it by hand, I have a lot more control over my bend. I have a lot better control over what it does, how far it goes, spring back, all kinds of other good stuff. Now, if you want to learn more about what all of that means and how to choose everything, you'll click on the video card that's going to pop up pretty soon when the episode goes after the live stream, or you can check out Tube Bending Basics when this is all over, and trust me, I break down every single piece of bending tubes, everything from choosing them to, finding out which one's which, centerline radius, the whole works. So I primarily like to use my hands or use a mechanical style or without hydraulic equipment attached to it because I have better control over my bend. And that's one of the biggest reasons. Why do I use the Model 3? Well, I'll tell you the difference between the Model 3 and the Model 32. The Model 32 is basically a Model 3 on steroids. It has a little bit bigger pins on it. It has a capability of bending thicker wall material all the way up to solid bar stock. And it also has a nice anti-spring back function on the actual on the ratchet assembly itself. So when you're bending it, it has a nice method for you to reset without the tube firing back on you, because when you get really big heavy metals like that, they spring back pretty far. Why do I not have one of those? Because I don't bend that heavy of material. I went and bought myself pretty much the stripped down bare minimum because I don't ever find myself needing anything more than what I have. Now if I do, I'll call up a buddy of mine who's got a 32. So the tube bender essentially works. I'll give you a quick demo of it. Set it up, you stick your tube inside of there, and it's gonna wrap itself around this die. And we tighten it all down. Tube goes in, tube locks it in place. We set ourselves a little bit of preload, drop our dial right there on 0, and create whatever bend it is that we need to create. Very, very simple. So again, you can use this machine, and you've seen me use it before for doing all kinds of different projects. You know, actually the bash bar episode didn't air, but I built the bash bar that's sitting on the wall up there, all with this. I built the Evo roll cage. I built probably a dozen roll cages with one of these by now. I do subframes, I do full tube chassis, and I like to do it all entirely by hand. And aside from the fact that it's a lot less expensive to do it by hand, I get a really great workout, which I'm kind of into that. Funny comment?
Yes, from Diamond Dog Cat. He said that tube bender just blew my mind. It's magical, just like Disney.
Yes, very much, very much. There's your basic bend. Now again, you can check out tube bending basics, and I go more advanced into what these actually do. Now, there's a lot of things that people ask me about this bender, and probably the #1 question I always get about this bender: how did I mount it to the floor? That's tricky, because a lot of people say they want to be able to move their bender after they're done with it, and they don't want studs sticking out of the floor. Pan it down, I'll show you right here. There's one bolt here that goes to a female anchor inside of the concrete. There's another bolt on the back side that also goes into a female anchor inside the concrete. On this side here and on this side here, those are my adjustments to level out and zero my bender. I can shim it, I can move it, I can adjust it. That's very, very important to have around there, because you've seen me in different episodes trying to level out my bender, because I've told you before many, many times there's never ever a reason to bend a crooked tube. So when you're doing offset bending and whatnot, you need to check it. You need to make sure your bender is zeroed out. That's why I have it set up like that. So if you use female concrete anchors, you can take it out of the ground, stick let's say a bolt or a plug or something back in there to keep the debris out. You can take your bender and set it aside. Do whatever you want with it. And you've seen me do it a few times in the other episodes. So as far as the tube bending goes with this bender, you're really not limited to anything. So we got different bends, different radius, different sizes, different everything. All it is just changing the die size or change the center line radius or whatever you want. But there is almost no limit to what you can do with one of these. The bender itself costs, I think, around 300 bucks, depending on where you buy it from. Some of them more expensive. The dies, they're pretty expensive themselves. But let's say you buy one tube bender with one size die and you make a roll cage, let's say for like a time attack car that only uses one diameter of tube, theoretically you've paid for it, all in one shot. Now, tube benders are not necessarily limited to things like this big bender that we have here, or even bigger ones or smaller ones we have. But let's talk about some of the smaller ones real quick. Some of us have seen one of these. This is a very, very basic hand-style tubing bender. You can use it for brake lines, you can use it for fuel lines, you can do all kinds of different stuff. We got different sizes on 3 different center line radiuses, but here's how they work. Just the same as the other one, instead of drawing the actual tube around the die, we're actually forcing it around the die. Stick it in there, change the direction, change the angle on it. Let's see, we'll go back, we'll go up 45 degrees. You see the actual scale of where you're bending is actually listed out there. Now you've bent a tube. Now you'll see in a future episode the ultimate fuel system, and you've probably seen it on social media where I built that ridiculously insane fuel system for the back of our Buffy Evo. That thing was absolutely incredible. It's a beautiful system, it's extremely functional, which I love about it the most, and it looks kind of cool. But that one, I did a whole lot of tube bending. I used, aside from that small one, I used this size, which is a much bigger version of the one that I just showed you. This is for 5/8 OD soft tubing. You could probably stick in some really thin wall like steel tubing and probably get a good bend on it. But it works pretty much the exact same way. You lock the tube inside of there, you start bending, you stop when you get to the degree you want. Now I have these in all kinds of different sizes. I have them in the small ones. We have different dies for the JB Squared Model 3. We have different sizes for different size tubing. Now, getting yourself a good brand is going to get you far, and not getting mixed up in the difference between tube benders and pipe benders will get you farther. Now, what does a pipe bender look like? I don't own one, so basically what I can describe, we've seen it all from the Harbor Chicago store, everybody's favorite cheap store. We've seen one of those around. It's kind of like almost like an A-frame. There's a bottle jack in the middle, and you'll see the die goes up like this, and then it goes up between two rollers and smashes the pipe upward. That's a pipe bender. That is not a tube bender. It's not meant for bending tubes. The die sizes, everything else changed. They're totally different. Don't ever buy yourself a pipe bender if you're going to use, you know, let's say a bending tube for a roll cage. That also goes with saying, if you go to the metal supply store and you order yourself 120 feet worth of pipe, you're not going to be able to build a roll cage out of it. You're going to have to find a way to go back, refund it, and get 120 feet worth of tube. So make sure that you don't get those two confused. Tube, pipe, two totally different things. Now, we'll go on to other ways of changing metal up, aside from doing it by hand, aside from doing it by machine. We have small machines that are relatively inexpensive, this one being a combination brake shear and slip roller. I used this on the chopper seat episode, and you'll see it come up in the custom aero mods episode where I did a full aluminum body kit for a Honda Civic Si. That one's coming up pretty soon. Still in editing on that one. But this particular model is not really the greatest one in the world. Okay, it's rated at, say, I think 22 gauge, but 22 gauge to shear is actually pretty ambitious, especially for this model. It won't do it, so I pretty much ignore the fact that it has a shear on it. The slip roll, on the other hand, works pretty well. Feed your material inside of there. Start cranking. It creates a nice little roll out of it. Now this, you can obviously change the tightness or the radius of how that actually bends and whatnot, but a good slip roller will get you pretty far in whatever you want to do if you want to actually start shape-shifting metal like this, like sheet metal. Now another one, bending. There's lots of ways to bend metal. One of them using a brake. There's a section inside of here. Slip it inside of here. These pieces right here are called fingers. This particular model is designed to do boxes and pans, which means you can actually break one direction, slip it between the other ones, and break another direction. What is a brake? A brake is a fancy way of saying bend. Straight, nice and even. Now, in the event that you don't have the money or anything to buy a combination brake shear slip roll or an actual brake itself or any one of those other fancy nice tools, there are other methods to bending. There are other ways to do that. Let's take the very, very basic, simple hand tool, the hand bender. How does it work? Grab a hold. This one has incremental notches on it, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/4, 1 inch, and then of course this would be about 1 1/4 inches. A little force, there's a bend. Now the difference between this side done in the actual brake itself and the radius of this one done entirely by hand, they're two different ones. So you might want to actually go back and kind of shape this out with, let's say, a hammer and dolly or something like a nice straight edge, and that'll actually get you a nice clean edge on it. Now let's say that you don't have either of those and you don't want to actually run a brake with the hand benders or the hand shear or seamers. If you don't want to do that across an entire piece and you don't even have a brake, or you don't have a brake that's large enough for that, there is another option. It's a little bit primitive, but it will do the job. You can clamp that piece in between two pieces of wood. Clamp it down nice and tight. You can smash it along with a hammer, you can follow it, you can do whatever it is that you need to do in order to get that metal braked over where it needs to be. Now this is just kind of an old school trick, and it will definitely save you some money, and it takes a little bit of practice, but with practice, you get perfection. But let's just say for a minute that we want to do something more. We want to add a little bit more to this one. That hole that we put in there earlier, what can we do with a hole? Well, you can leave a hole absolutely bare and empty and worthless, or you can do one of my favorite things, which is grab a hold of the Dimple dies, and we can make this a relatively weak piece and structurally add to it, create a much stronger piece, in which case we'll use the Dimple dies. You see me use these all the time. What is a Dimple die? Dimple die has a recessed edge in this side a raised edge on this side, and when you stick the two of them together with a piece of sheet metal in there, it will create this contour and profile, which will eventually strengthen up the metal. So here's a quick demonstration of that. I can bend this metal right now very, very easy between those 2 points, right? Because there's no structure and there's less metal here, so that this amount of metal and this amount of metal is what I'm bending, not the full length on this one, which is just a little bit tougher to do. This one bends very, very easy because there's no structure to it. So if we change the direction of the actual metal itself, as in trying to simulate the idea, or the same idea of tearing the metal, it'll be a lot harder to bend. Good, you take the Dimple die and stick it inside of your press. Softer and thinner materials, such as aluminum or thin sheet metal, can be done where you can actually stick this inside of a vise, and you can smash the two of them together and you can create a pretty decent dimple. So we'll stick it here in the press. See how it starts deforming, changing shape a little bit, and then it irons out when it gets down to the bottom. There's a dimple hole. How much more difficult is that to bend? Notice how it bends everywhere around the hole and not through it. That means it's more structurally sound than it was before without the dimple die into it. That's a way to do something like reduce the amount of weight that's in the material by removing that section or cutting it out with the hole saw, and then strengthening it back up with use of the dimple die, because you change the direction of the sheet metal, like where you can bend sheet metal, but it's not easy to tear it. So essentially what you do is change the direction of the sheet metal, which will create it more like trying to tear it. So it doesn't want to bend in the opposite direction very easily. That's the purpose of dimple dies. Subtract a little bit of material to make it lighter, dimple die to make it stronger. So we've learned how to shape shift, we've learned how to do all kinds of different crazy things with it. What if we want to just hold those pieces together while we're working on something? That's what we're going to go over right now. Clamping. Well, we only have 2 hands. The majority of us were only born with 2 of them. I have yet to see anybody born with like 6 or 7 of them. In fact, I'm kind of jealous if they are. Because sometimes we need an extra set of hands or something to hold something in place while we work on it. What are some very, very basic tools to have? Well, this is about as primitive as it gets. A C-clamp. C-clamps come in all kinds of different shapes, sizes, brands, functions, good, crappy, bad, indifferent. There are different things that they do, but they will absolutely take whatever it is that you need by use of screwing it down and clamping it, and it will hold it in place. Now, we use these for a lot of things like, you see a lot of the, DIY home guys, they'll do a brake job, they'll stick a caliper in there and clamp that down, pushes the piston back in. Fantastic tool for the job. You only want to spend a couple of dollars. Now, again, these come in different shapes and sizes. Good brands will stay true and straight. Crappy brands will start moving around and adjusting and getting all really kind of nasty on you, and they don't last very long. But again, if you use a decent brand, it's going to last you a long time. But if you don't use them very often, go ahead and go cheap on it. It's entirely possible. Another very simple tool, I have tons of these. Locking pliers. I have so many locking pliers. They're all attached to my bench here. We have them in the standard style, we have the C style, we have large C styles, we have needle nose, and we have the pony clamp. The pony clamp is a really awesome piece to have, because without having to sit there and do too much adjustment, if you want just say like a loose fit, let's just say I was going to weld this together, voila, it's on there, it's held, it's strong, it's true. And these are very, very inexpensive. They work out great. These will hold everything in place where you need it to be held in for quite some time, and they do a really good job. Now, once again, there are good brands and there are crappy brands. If you're going to be using clamping for just about anything and you expect it to hold and not cause a lot of your frustrations, or in my case, pinch the everlasting crap out of the palm of your hand for using a really crappy tool, buy some good ones. Good brands will get you a lot farther. Specialty stuff. Magnetic clamps. Now again, this is another one of those things that I have quite a few of them, and I use them all the time. More particularly, I use them on a lot of tube work. And particularly, I cut these ones, especially for this episode. Cut out this notch by hand. If you want to learn how to do that, check out tube notching. How to notch tubes without a tube notcher. But if you stick the two of them together, and let's just say you need it to be held like this, it's not going to stay. There's no way. You're not going to be able to get it to hold up. But if you want to hold it in this area and perfectly straight in that section right there, you take one of your magnetic clamps, and now that piece is held in place. Let's say that you wanted it to stand upright. And let's just see if I can get it to happen inside of this video. There we go. Magnetic clamps are fantastic for doing things like this, to keep pieces in place. They've held tubes over my head as I started to weld them, or as I put a tack down on it. Now, one thing that they're not very useful for is when it comes to doing a lot of welding. Now, if you want to lay down a tack weld or something like that, that's awesome, you can do that. But if you want to lay down, let's say, a ridiculously heavy weld or a full penetrating long weld all the way up to it, you'll notice if you've ever tried to do this, doesn't matter if you have a TIG or if you have a MIG, if you get too close to that magnet, it's going to start sucking that metal away and it's going to mess your weld up. So use your holding magnets for things like tack welding, or something just to get it in place to where you can remove the magnet and then go back and weld. But having a good set of holding magnets is a great investment, especially if you're going to be doing tube work and all kinds of other stuff. Now we'll get a little bit more into that sheet metal that we were working on earlier. You notice, remember that we cut the hole inside of one of them. We'll do the same thing on this one. Clean that out a little bit. Sheet metal work. You see these in the aircraft industry all the time. This is a temporary locking rivet, sometimes known as a Cleco. Sometimes people call them Clecos. Some people call them Clecos. There are different names of them, but see exactly what they do. As you squeeze down on it, you notice these fingers come out, this collapses, it goes inside of the hole, and as it retracts, it pulls away, and that keeps the two pieces of metal fastened together. So if I need a temporary way of holding these two, let's say if I was going to use rivets or something like that, they're now held together temporarily. We can smash a rivet into the hole later on down the road. We can take it out of there and weld it shut. We can do all kinds of other things. Now if you use one of them, it's allowed to pivot. If you use more than one of them, it's going to hold it steady in the place where you want it to be. Now we use these all the time. They do come with a price tag, and you have to buy obviously the special tool that goes with it. If you do a lot of sheet metal work where you need to stick two pieces together like that, well, you might want to grab yourself a set of those. So up to this point, we've done some basic measuring, we've done some basic cutting, we did a little shifting, we did a little bit of clamping down, all the rest of that stuff. What do we need to do next? We need to figure out how we're going to stick all these pieces of metal together, and we're going to go over welding in just a moment. Welding. Here comes all of the questions, a lot of the things that a lot of people have asked me over the years regarding welding. I don't make a ton of videos that go into welding, which I'll try to get a little bit more further into welding as part of season 2. I left most of that out because there's a lot that goes into that, and I really honestly believe much of it requires a formal education combined with a serious amount of hands-on. It takes practice. Your weld is your signature, just the same as you sign your statement when you buy something. Your weld is the exact same thing, solidified like a secret language for other welders to see. That takes practice, that takes knowledge, that takes a lot of things to learn how to do, to understand, and to actually create and become that kind of welder. I will be getting into this further, I promise, but it's going to be coming up in future episodes of season 2. But for right now, we need to know how to stick some stuff together, don't we? Welding is a little bit more advanced than just sticking a few pieces of metal together, and most commonly you find that there's 3 pieces that you're sticking together. You got piece A, piece B, and the filler material. That's your basic 3 pieces. Now you can stick different grades together. You have ferrous metals like steel and stuff like that, steel, iron. There's different kinds of various grades of that one. That list goes on forever. Non-ferrous metals, you have aluminum and different alloy contents and all the rest of that good stuff. There's lots of stuff that gets into that one, and those are the things that you need to know about before you start sticking them together. But two welding styles that I primarily use in this industry. MIG welding. That is where the wire spits out of the welder, the gas comes out with it, and you stick your pieces of metal together. Now, is there anything wrong with MIG welding? Absolutely not. There's nothing wrong with MIG welding. 9 times out of 10, you can use it on just about everything that you want to do, as long as your skills are true. The only thing I don't particularly like about it, and a lot of people ask me on roll cages, for example, can you use a MIG welder on a roll cage? The answer is yes. You can use a MIG welder on a roll cage, unless the actual rules state specifically that you cannot. So certain things like welding chromoly, MIG welding is generally not approved as a technique or method to use for welding. So one of the reasons why I personally don't like to use the MIG welder on a roll cage, or on actually sticking the tubes and whatnot together, is as the wire comes out of there, you'll see it, we'll get up close here, as I pull the trigger, the wire is immediately live and it starts feeding out. That's what feeds and that's what fills the hole. Okay, this one starts out soft and it goes into it. It's, you know, that depends on the welder itself that you get. But the weld is immediately live, or the wire is live, and it immediately starts fusing and welding together. When you do that, you end up with cold spots. So as I stick these two pieces of metal together up here, when I run this, you're gonna see that it's gonna start out where it's not gonna get a great deal of penetration, but as soon as I come down here and it starts to heat up a little bit more each time, it's going to start penetrating, it's gonna start filling in. But this area of the weld is potentially weaker because it's colder and didn't get its correct penetration. That's because the welder itself just started feeding out automatically right off the get-go. So what are the downsides to MIG welding? Well, you're kind of limited to doing certain types of materials. Usually you just do like steel, whatever the case is. One of the advantages, you can weld a lot faster than you can with a TIG. Definitely weld a lot faster with a TIG. But if you want to weld things like aluminum, stuff like that, alloys and such, you need to switch over to using something like a spool gun or something like that to actually weld it. So very, very simple. Take your pieces, you point, you pull the trigger, metal sticks together. One of the other downsides is there's a lot of slag and there's a lot of junk associated with it. We'll go over the comparison in just a moment, but let me throw a bead down on here. I am not the greatest MIG welder that ever lived. In fact, I'm pretty impatient when it comes to MIG because I know it's faster than TIG, and I usually like to just kind of haul through it and just start just blasting away on it. So I get into my mode, I get into my pattern, I get it all laid down there. So one of the downsides to it is I'm actually covered in hot slag because I'm not wearing a welding jacket right now. That's kind of a pain. You get this nice little layer of junk that gets onto it. You get little pieces of slag, you get all kinds of other stuff, and if your weld sucks, then it doesn't look very pretty. Same thing goes with anything else. But let's take a look at this real quick. You notice the point where I started my weld? Notice how it's a little higher built up than it is down here, where I started advancing and getting a little bit heavier and the penetration went in there. Flip it over on the back side and you look at the heat signature of it, you'll notice that it's kind of cold up top there. Let me see if I can get some light on here. It's a little cold up there, but that's when it starts to penetrate, starts flowing through. That's what I don't necessarily like about the MIG, and that's why I don't use it. However, it is approved for doing things like roll cages. It is allowed unless otherwise stated. So if you want to use your MIG welder for doing things like roll cages, chassis work, whatever the case is, yes, it's absolutely acceptable as long as your skills are true. So one of the things that we do to combat the cold spots is we'll actually start it, advance a little bit, and then back it up once it starts getting filled, and then we'll just fill right back over it. Kind of common practice. There's a lot of different techniques and whatnot, which later on down the road, further in the Fabricating series, I will get into that. So we have the MIG all taken care of. Jump on to everybody's favorite welder, the TIG. How does TIG welding essentially work? Well, it's a little bit more complicated than simply pulling the trigger and aiming it at pieces of metal that you want to stick together. And, more importantly, you're actually working 3 different portions of your body, 3 appendages at once to create one solution. That solution is a solidified weld that will pass and will be acceptable per the standards and everything that's set forth. So let's come up in here real quick and take a look at the torch itself. This is my number 9F welding torch. It is number 9 being the size of it, F meaning flexible, which means I can bend it this way, I can bend it that way, I can get into all kinds of different shapes, sizes, spaces, different spots. I use a gas lens on mine, but let's break it down very, very simply. What does it do? As this little piece of tungsten that's sticking out of here, as I step on the pedal and I aim it at the piece of work that we're doing, this little arc of electricity is going to kind of shoot out of this, go into the workpiece, and it's going to start melting it. And as it melts, I'm going to take my filler rod and I'm going to fill it back up as I go along. All the while, I'm controlling the amount of heat that goes into it with my foot. Down at my foot here, there is a pedal. And just the same as working with a car, or an accelerator pedal on the car, you step on the gas, you go faster. You let off the gas, you go slower. That's not necessarily what it means on the welder, but if you step on the gas, you get more amperage. If you let off the gas, you get less. So I'm going to put a little tack weld here. And that's essentially how we control it. Now, it didn't necessarily want to cooperate with me, so that was probably the longest tack weld in history. But what I'm going to do is take this, hold it just above the area where I want to weld, where I'm going to control the heat. I'm actually going to point and direct it at it. At the same time, I'm simultaneously filling it with rod. I'm putting the rod back into it, and I'm controlling the amount of amperage and heat and everything else that goes into my weld via my foot. I'm also not the world's greatest TIG welder, but for a little demo piece that should do the job. All of this was precisely controlled. I got to be able to actually tell it how much heat I wanted into it, how much I didn't want into it, how much rod I wanted to fill in there, and everything else in between. So that's essentially what you gain out of a TIG welder. There's also no mess for me to clean up. It's one of those nicer things that you can do. A lot more precise control, and of course the ability to weld other metals, such as aluminum. With my welder, I have the ability just to push a button and switch right over to aluminum. It's a fantastic thing. Aluminum welds on a different wave. It runs on AC power instead of DC power, so you'll see it, you'll hear a completely different sound out of it, and the metal is just a little bit different when it gets down to it. Well, aluminum just kind of turns to snot as you're welding it, so I mean, try to play with that and stick some metal together as you're going. But same rules apply. Try to get as much precise control out of it. Lay down some welds. Now that's not likely to win the stack of dimes award for a demo, but it will definitely do to show you the differences between the two of them. Which brand of welder do I use? Which model do I use? You actually might have noticed in the recent postings on social media, Facebook, Instagram, both of those, I'm kind of in the middle of a toss-up between getting a more production style welder, something a little bit heavier than what I have. And I'm a huge fan of Miller. I've been using Miller forever. I used to have a Dynasty before I retired, then I bought the Diversion. It's a fantastic welder, it really is. It's a Diversion 180. This one runs on both your standard 110, 120 input, and also runs on 240. It goes up to 180 amps, so it will weld just about anything that you have inside of the, your home shop, and even some of the stuff I use around here. But it's not quite production style, so it's a little bit limited on its capabilities. It's very, very simplified. The only thing I don't really like it is being an experienced welder. I don't have control over my weld. I don't have control over, let's say, changing the the background amplitude on it, changing the sine wave itself, going from, like, let's say, the soft square wave to the triangular wave, or traditional sine wave, or square wave, or any one of those. I don't have the capability of changing any of that when it comes to this welder. But for everything else around the place, it does a great job. Miller on the MIG welder. This one's a Millermatic 141. It's one of the newer style ones, which these things pretty much weld all by themselves. All you have to really do is pull the trigger and go. It has a lot of very simple functions. They simplified it and they made it a little bit smaller, compact, lightweight. Another decent brand is obviously the biggest competition from Miller is Lincoln. Now, I've used lots of Lincolns over the years. They are fantastic welders. I just happen to have Millers because I went with them instead. But here's the thing. Which welder should you buy? I will stand my ground until I am dead. Do not ever buy a cheap welder. Do not buy a cheap welder. If it is on sale for 90 bucks or $89.99, that's a cheap welder. If it costs only about $400 or $500, that's a cheaper welder, and it's also not the greatest thing in the world. Or you can spend, you know, a decent amount of money and get a really good welder, which is usually anywhere between, let's say, you know, $900 to, you know, all the way up to several thousand. You can get a decent welder. But here's the problem with buying cheap welders. Cheap welders produce cheap results. If you are learning how to weld, if you're a beginner welder, you're going to learn bad habits because bad machines or cheap machines force you to learn bad habits by working around a welder's deficiency. So if you have a crappy welder, it's going to lay down a crappy result and you're going to learn some crappy habits. Those are things you don't want. Stick with the name brand. The top two, Miller, Lincoln. Those two are the top two. There are other ones out there, but those are the only two that I'm really going to recommend. Okay? Do not buy a cheap welder. If the price is too good to be true, it is. It's a cheap welder. Don't buy it. Get yourself something good, especially if you're going to invest into your future as a welder. Now, one really quick thing here that I want to show you, because I'm going to end up having to change this torch head out. This is a fantastic demonstration. One of those things that we get to learn how to deal with that absolutely sucks when you get into the industry is these ceramic cups that go onto the end of the TIG welder itself. Some of us have experienced this before, some of us have not, but they're pretty brittle. They're kind of fragile. And it doesn't take a whole lot to tear one of those apart. Now, I was brought into this one, a really awesome solution here, by Superior Welding. He came up to me and said, how would you like to not break any of those cups anymore? I said, that'd be awesome. I'd love to. So they sent out the unbreakable TIG cup. Now, I did just crack my cap on the back of there trying to bust this up, but the unbreakable TIG cup is quite literally exactly what it says. Stick this on the end of it, you go smashing around on it. That is a cool piece. Be on the lookout for that one in the future. I just got a hold of it the other day and I am absolutely obsessed with it. I love it.
What do you recommend for welding on it?
Oh, you know what? That's another thing that I was going to bring up here. Right, you probably noticed my my welding hood. This is old school. This is a not an auto darkening. It is an old school big window, number 10 lens shade, whatever the case is. This was my first welding helmet or hood, whichever one you want to call it. It's been through a lot. The reason I stick with it is because in the infancy of auto darkening helmets, once upon a time, I was flash burned entirely too many times messing with an auto dark, so I always stuck with this one, and it has that sentimental value to it. Now, don't buy a cheap hood. If you've ever been flash burned before, you'll know that it feels like 40 grit sandpaper on your eyelids, and it absolutely sucks. So be very, very careful and invest into a really good welding helmet. You should talk to a local representative. There's usually one around in just about everywhere that you can find somebody who is knowledgeable in selling their product and whatnot, and there's be some good recommendations that go with that. So that's pretty much the basics as far as simple tools are concerned. Very easy stuff, right? So what happens when you want to do something a little bit more advanced? What happens when you want to do something a little bit more production? And just the stuff that you have around the shop here isn't quite going to cut it. There are other options. And as we did in the beginning of this episode where I went for a little tour around the shop, you notice that I have that machine shop on the other side over there. So let's go over a couple of different things. Tools, materials, functions, products, all the rest of that good stuff of what we normally use. When you want to get into something a little bit bigger and you want to do more production style work, you start grabbing big expensive machines. So let's run with the horizontal bandsaw. This is a horizontal bandsaw, meaning that it sits horizontally. Now the best part about one of these things is they are pretty industrial and they will cut virtually anything, and they will cut it relatively quick too at the same time. It also has a liquid fed or liquid cooled saw blade, and it makes very light work out of just about everything. If this was a chop saw blade, I wouldn't be able to do that. It keeps it cool, and the amount that actually gets cut off of there, or the slag that's on there, it's not necessarily as bad as, you know, using the one with the chop saw, or the side with the chop saw on it. But you actually, I can get you this piece here combined with this piece here. This one being done on the horizontal bandsaw, this one being done on the chop saw. This slag will come off actually a lot easier than this slag will. Now, I did just kind of really run through that pretty heavy and pretty quick, but you know, you get the idea. One of these, you can stack up a lot of tubes, you can stack up bigger tubes, you can stack up more material, solid material. It will cut through just about all of it. Now, if you want to get involved in something like this, expect to spend well over $1,000 for a decent machine. The other one that I use for cutting some of the semi-intricate shapes is my vertical bandsaw. Now, I did have this, of course, in season 1. I've had it for a few years now, and I only pretty much use it on aluminum when I have to do curved shapes, tight shapes, or really, you know, make pretty quick work out of it. So, how fast does a horizontal or a vertical bandsaw work? On aluminum, it slices it up like it was never there. But if I want to do something like create a nice little radius, like that, you can use a vertical bandsaw to do that. You can use it for all kinds of different stuff. Now, I don't usually use this on steel or anything like that, but you can. If you get the right blade and whatnot, you can absolutely make it work. Now, we did some drilling and cutting and everything like that with hand tools, and of course we're in the machine shop, and now I have a mill. This is combination mill and drilling machine. It's more aimed at milling, and it also works as well for drilling. But this is how you do things like straighten out pieces of metal. Like on this piece of metal here particularly, it's not set up funky, it actually was cut crooked. But if I need to use this mill here to shave down the top of it and make it nice, flat, and even, or machine it all out, cut shapes, cut slots, cut holes, whatever the case is, I can do all of that with my mill. And we're gonna haul ass through this thing. This being a very rough pass, just for the purposes of demonstration here. Get some. There are a lot of things in the shop you can use a mill for, aside from just sticking holes in things. Now, if I was to change out this R8 collar, or this collar right here, I could put it in a standard drill, and we can pop holes into it. But if I was to take this, rotate it, drop that thing in there, I can create a slot, I can do all kinds of stuff with it. Now, small mills like this one, they usually have a price tag of a couple $1,000s. The only thing I'm really missing is my lathe. I don't have a lathe yet. And of course, on top of that, another one of those unique tools that you can have around your shop is a way to actually reduce and remove some other metal by ways of like this drum and belt, or the disc and belt sander, which this thing's pretty industrial, and when it gets to going, it really hauls. So once it's in there, you can take your metal, you can stick it up against there, you can change it, you can shape it, you can do whatever you want with it. You can even stick it on the belt part and plane it down. So now, we're going to take just a quick moment here so I can get set up for the next thing, but we're going to go over the very, very basic, and I mean basic tools of the industry, like the simplest thing that you could ever have, or something that you can actually create and make inside of your own shop that will make your life a little bit easier. Good practice, and it uses many of the pieces that we've been doing already. So, we're going to get into that in just a moment. What is a really, really basic tool that you need inside of your shop that you can make even better than what you can buy off the shelf and makes absolutely fantastic practice? Dustpan. Why not, right? We can use pretty much all of the tools that we've mentioned and demonstrated here. Right now, I'm gonna build a custom dustpan. They're very, very simple to do. In fact, I'm gonna start with a flat sheet of 18 gauge sheet metal. And what we're gonna do is cut it to shape, cut it to size, do what we need to do, put it in the brake, bend it all up, weld a handle to it, and then I'm gonna give it to one of you guys that's watching in and that can properly answer a question that I will be having after the question and answer session. I will absolutely put it out there and you could possibly win this. Well, when it becomes what it is. So we're starting out 18 gauge. This is 10 inches tall by 17 inches wide. Each one of these brakes for the sides of the dustpan as well as the top is going to have 2 inches on top of it. So we're gonna take our tape measure. I'm going to mark out 2 inches here, and I'm going to mark out 2 inches here. We're also going to mark out 2 inches here, 2 inches here, 2 inches there, and 2 inches there. Now we're going to need a nice straight even surface. You might realize that I don't have one long enough to actually tackle that section in between there, but we have one that can tackle this section right here. Straighten out our lines there. I'm gonna go grab something that's gonna make it a little bit easier for me to work with. Also a useful tool that you can have inside of your shop. This is a 4-foot level. It's a little overkill for making this line, but that's all right. Now, if you don't have something like a 4-foot level or whatever the case is, and you do have yourself a nice cut pile of material, then use the cut pile, absolutely. Because you can usually find like a nice straight piece, and you've seen me use it in different episodes before. Now, when we cut these out, this section right here is going to go away, and this section right here is going to go away. Both of them gone, no more. But we're going to need some way to actually attach these two together, because, I mean, you can actually weld these seams up, but let's just say you didn't have the capability to weld it up. I'm going to show you a neat little solution here. Now, marker's too permanent. Let's create some tabs. We'll go a 1/2 inch up on both sides. I'm going to use my square to mark those lines. And I'm just going to kind of freehand this here. We'll do a little bit that way, do a little bit that way, something kind of like this, something kind of like that. And that's the area that we're cut out. So all of this area in here is going to go away. All of this area in here is going to go away. Now, how to create that taper without actually doing that while it's made into a dustpan. So we're going to take, once again, something with some length to it with a nice straight edge on it. I'm going to go down to this point right here at the edge of the sheet metal, up to this point right here at the edge of this sheet metal, or at the end of this line. Press down firmly, make a line. When we bend it up, it will taper down. Same thing on this side. What are we going to do with the tin snips? We're going to get strong. Nice even cut. Down there. We'll cut across the top at our tab line. Now let's cut the tab marks out. Get that out of there. Slice this off of the edge here. And the same thing on this side. Get rid of this. Get rid of this. Now, we can absolutely use our tin snips to go running up the side here. We can also use a grinder. We can use all kinds of other nifty, handy dandy tools that we mentioned before. But we have another one that I neglected to mention earlier. These are called double cuts. I don't use double cuts often, which is why I bought kind of a crappy brand. And it's because that if they break or they get destroyed, I didn't spend too much money and I don't really have to worry about it. We're gonna use our double cuts to run alongside of this line and the same thing on the other side to get that line sheared. Nice and even. This is a little bit trickier. Now, at the end of these things, we got these really nice sharp points which will tear your skin alive. Do yourself a favor, cut those off before you throw it away. Now they won't stab you. Now, I'll show you guys because it's not too gruesome. This happened to me one time. Which hand was it? I think it was this hand. Yeah, it was this hand. Actually, you can't really even see it. But anyway, I left a sharp edge on the end of a table, and as I was reaching for something, I realized that my hand stopped moving while my body went. A piece of sheet metal with one of those really sharp hooks on the end of it went inside of my hand, or in one side of my hand and out the other. It was horrible. Had to get rushed to the hospital thanks to a buddy of mine. Got me there quick. I got glued back up. Everything was good to go. So, we have our basic shape laid out here. Everything's good to go on that one. Now, if we really wanted to, let's say our cuts were just a little bit off, we can go back over with the grinder, we can straighten them out, we can make it nice, neat, and even. But since everything was done pretty close to spec where we wanted it, we can absolutely take care of this, and we'll get over to the brake and start bending it up. Now before, again, like I said earlier, if you do not have yourself a brake, there are other ways of doing this. You can use, of course, the hand benders or the hand seamers, whichever one you want to call them. Some people even call them duck bills. You can use those. You can use the 2 blocks of wood and a hammer. That will absolutely get it done. Or if you are fortunate enough to own a brake, stick it inside of there. Try and encourage this metal to go up just a little bit more. This thing is not, like I said, it's kind of a cheap machine, but it works. Does the job. There's one side with our tabs up. I'm actually going to use my benders here. We'll bend those tabs back only slightly so they come around the back side of the back of the pan. Now, since this is a box and pan style, if I was to try and stick this on any other finger like that, you'll notice it'll go up to a certain point, and this finger itself will interfere. So that's why I have them slid out like this side. What we're going to do, load it back up in there, get it right on my mark. We're going to watch it pass right through, and I'm going to encourage that tab to kind of come back and fall right into place where it's supposed to. It's a little bit tricky. Pretty close. We actually had a little bit of interference, but this is one of those things we can fix with the sheet metal hammer. Hopefully this side will go just a little bit smoother. That one went a little bit better. So let's take some of our tools here, shape this out, get it all set up right, finish our pan off. Use some of what I have laying around here. Just some general shaping and forming, getting those tabs to roll over to the edge there, getting everything set up just right, iron out some of the kinks that we had in there. You don't really have to be a MacGyver, but you don't necessarily have to have the fanciest tools in the world in order to fix or change some metal up. Easy day. Now we have what's the start of a dustpan. Now in order to get this all welded up, let's say we'll use these this style of locking pliers, the needle nose style. We'll put that on that side. We'll use the C-clamp style on the back side here. Hold this all together. I'm gonna lay down a weld on there just to keep those tabs held up in place now. If you don't have a welder, you can absolutely cut a hole with a drill, and you can use rivets. You can use anything else that is a decent fastener that will hold nice and true and steady on there. Grab the welder. Oh, I need to turn that down. Much longer. Of course, I have outfitted it with my Superior Welding unbreakable TIG cup. I absolutely love this thing. That's a solid little tack, will do the job. Put one on this side. A decent little tack on that side. Take our clamps off here. There we go. Now we have it held in place. So we need to add ourselves a handle. That handle, I'm gonna put a big fat handle on this thing. I wanna see like some like madness when it comes to taking care of this dust, you know? So let's measure what our distance is in between. So we have a 13-inch dustpan. That means at 6.5 inches we have the center point of our dustpan. See if we can just get it kind of set up. I use my square here to draw myself a good line. Flip it over and use the ruler side here. It's 2 inches tall, so halfway. It's going to be at 1 inch in. Which is about right there. I'm going to eyeball the rest of this just so I can get some good clocking reference to show exactly where it's supposed to go. Nice and easy. Of course, in order to hold that handle in place, use my holding magnet. Now with any luck, the amount of amperage that I have to pump into here to get this tube attached to it, it's not going to be too much for that magnet to start pulling the arc away and pulling, of course, the metal and everything else away. So let's see if we can get this nice and set up, even, straight, flush mounted. Let's throw down a weld. Nice little tack there. Nice little tack there. Since I still have the power of the holding magnet, throw one on the bottom so that stays nice and even right where it's supposed to be. I can put my final weld on the inside there. This piece literally only took a few minutes to do, and now I have a useful tool made with simple tools inside of my shop for use inside of my shop. What do you think? Here's another thing that we're going to do here real quick. I'm going to finish that one up later off air, but as I mentioned earlier, we're going to give this away. In fact, what exactly is going to happen here, now I'm going to brand this up here, and I'm going to finish welding it. James Anderson with Anderson Motorsports is going to toss down one of his awesome paint jobs on it, lots of pinstriping, cool stuff like that. And while I really don't like my name to be synonymous with trash or dust or anything like that, I'm going to brand this up right here in the center for you guys. And the person who wins this, you get to use it inside of your shop or whatever the case is, wherever you like, hang it on the wall, man cave action, whatever you got. So I'm gonna brand this up right here for you. Simple little autogenous weld will do the job. Hold it in place. Now this MP tag being stainless, I have to let it kind of cool a little bit of post flow on it. I'll get the top section of it on here. Probably add a little filler to it. Alrighty. A very useful tool to have inside of your shop, made with simple tools. As part of the episode, we were doing a full-on live question and answer session as well as a giveaway, which was that dustpan, a t-shirt, and a small sticker pack, and a few other goodies of swag that I could get into the box to send out to the people that were participating on it, which all of my live streams, I encourage everybody to participate. So thank you very much for everybody that joined in. Congratulations to those guys that won all of those prizes and whatnot, and we will see you guys on the next episode.